Millionaire pretends to sleep to test shy maid and freezes when she does this to him. A wealthy man, lonely in his giant mansion, doesn't trust anyone, especially the shy maid hired to clean his home. So one night, he pretends to fall asleep, leaving his wallet right in front of her. But instead of stealing, she does something he never expected, something so shocking it shakes him to his core. And just when he thinks he's figured her out, her little boy whispers a secret that stops his heart cold. "Mommy says you're my daddy." Now the past he tried to forget comes crashing back. His fortune, his family, his pride, everything is at stake. Will he risk it all for the truth, or lose the only chance he has to be a father again? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The autumn wind whistled through the bare branches outside Ethan Whitmore's mansion, its mournful sound matching his mood as he sat in his leather armchair. The setting sun cast long shadows across the marble floors and designer furniture, highlighting the emptiness of the vast space. He lifted his crystal tumbler, watching the amber liquid catch the fading light. "Another evening alone," he muttered to himself, his voice echoing in the cavernous living room. The mansion, worth millions, felt more like a museum than a home. Family photos lined the walls, but they were just reminders of what money had destroyed. His children's smiling faces haunted him, faces he now only saw when their bank accounts ran low. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7 times, its deep resonance filling the silence. Ethan's thoughts drifted to Mrs. Patterson, his housekeeper of 15 years, who had announced her retirement that morning. She had been one of the few constants in his life since Margaret's death, one of the few people he'd almost trusted. "Mr. Whitmore? James?" Wheeler's voice interrupted his brooding. His financial advisor stood in the doorway, tablet in hand. "We need to discuss the staffing situation." Ethan waved him in, though his jaw tightened. "I can manage without help." "With all due respect, sir, you can't. This house needs proper maintenance, and you need someone to handle the daily operations." James adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. "I've taken the liberty of contacting a reputable agency." "No agencies," Ethan cut in sharply. "I won't have strangers prowling through my home, eyeing what they can steal." James sighed, a sound Ethan had heard too often lately. "Then perhaps we could consider recommendations from trusted sources. The church, perhaps?" Ethan's fingers drummed against the armrest. The church had been Margaret's domain, not his, but she had trusted their judgment. "Fine," he conceded reluctantly, "but I want thorough background checks." 2 days later, Maria Delgado stood in his study, her hands clasped modestly in front of her simple black dress. There was something different about her, a quietness that went beyond mere shyness. Her references from St. Michael's were impeccable, but Ethan had learned the hard way that appearances could deceive. "You understand this position requires absolute discretion," he said, studying her face for any sign of duplicity, "and complete honesty." "Yes, Mr. Whitmore." Her voice was soft but steady. "I believe trust must be earned through actions, not words." He raised an eyebrow at that. "Indeed. And what actions would those be, Miss Delgado?" "Showing up every day, doing my work well, respecting boundaries." She met his gaze directly for the first time. "I'm not here to judge or pry, sir. I'm here to help maintain your home." Her answer was perfect, almost too perfect. Ethan had heard such promises before, from people who saw his wealth as an opportunity. His own children had mastered the art of saying what he wanted to hear, right before asking for money. "You'll start tomorrow," he decided abruptly. "Mrs. Patterson will show you the routines for the rest of the week. After that, you're on your own." "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. I won't let you down." As she turned to leave, Ethan watched her carefully. There was no spring in her step, no triumphant smile hidden in the corners of her mouth, just quiet dignity and what appeared to be relief. That evening, after Maria had left, Ethan paced his study. The room, with its rich mahogany panels and leather-bound books, had always been his sanctuary. Now it felt like a cage of his own making, filled with the ghosts of broken trust. "Everyone has an angle," he murmured, running his finger along the spines of his books. "Everyone wants something." He paused at his desk, picking up a framed photo of Margaret. Her smile still made his heart ache after all these years. She would have scolded him for his cynicism, reminded him that not everyone was out to take advantage. But Margaret hadn't seen how money had poisoned their children's hearts, hadn't witnessed their transformation from loving family to occasional visitors with practiced smiles and ready excuses. She hadn't experienced the bitter taste of betrayal from those closest to him. Looking out the window at the manicured gardens below, Ethan made his decision. He would test Maria Delgado, prove to himself that his instincts were right. Tomorrow, he would leave some cash in plain sight. Nothing too obvious, but enough to tempt. $500 in the study, carelessly left on the side table as if forgotten. "Let's see what kind of person you really are, Miss Delgado," he said to the empty room. The dying sun cast long shadows across the floor, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled, as if warning him about the path he was choosing. But Ethan had learned his lessons the hard way, paid for them with his trust and his relationships. He wouldn't make the same mistakes again. Tomorrow would reveal Maria's true character, and he was certain it would prove what he already knew, that kindness always came with a price tag. The grandfather clock chimed again, its sound echoing through the empty halls of his mansion. Another evening alone, but better alone than betrayed. He returned to his chair, picked up his tumbler, and settled in to plan tomorrow's test, ignoring the small voice in his head that sounded suspiciously like Margaret, telling him he was becoming exactly what he feared, someone who could no longer see the good in others. The autumn morning light filtered through the tall windows of the mansion, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Maria arrived precisely at 7 o'clock, her practical shoes making soft sounds as she moved through the grand entrance hall. She carried a small, worn Bible in her work bag. Ethan noticed this detail from his position at the top of the stairs, though he pretended to be engrossed in his morning paper. Maria went about her duties with methodical care. Her movements were efficient but unhurried as she dusted the antique furniture and straightened the already perfect picture frames. The silence of the house was broken only by her gentle humming, old hymns that Ethan recognized from Margaret's church days. "Amazing Grace" drifted up from the living room, followed by "How Great Thou Art." From his study, Ethan watched through the crack in the door as Maria worked. She treated each object with reverence, handling the family photos with particular care. When she came across a portrait of Margaret, she paused, her cloth hovering over the silver frame. "She had such kind eyes," Maria murmured softly, unaware of her audience. She gave the frame an extra gentle polish before moving on. Ethan frowned. Was this part of an act? He'd seen plenty of people put on performances before, playing whatever role they thought would win his trust. But there was something different about the way Maria worked. No flourishes, no checking to see if anyone was watching, no attempt to draw attention to her diligence. Throughout the day, she maintained her quiet presence. When their paths crossed, she offered a respectful nod, but didn't attempt to engage in unnecessary conversation. She seemed to sense his desire for space, moving to another room whenever he entered one she was cleaning. As evening approached, Ethan put his plan into motion. He settled into his favorite armchair by the fireplace, a book open on his lap. His wallet, fat with $500 in cash, sat conspicuously on the coffee table. He made a show of reading, then gradually allowed his head to droop, his breathing to deepen. Through nearly closed eyes, he watched as Maria entered the room to do her final tidying of the day. She moved quietly, careful not to disturb his apparent slumber. When she noticed the wallet, she paused. Ethan's heart beat faster, waiting for her true nature to reveal itself. But Maria didn't reach for the wallet. Instead, she looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Was it concern? Pity? She disappeared for a moment, returning with a soft blanket from the hallway closet. With gentle movements, she draped it over his shoulders, tucking it carefully around him. Then, to his utter surprise, she knelt beside his chair. Her hands clasped together, head bowed, she began to whisper a prayer. "Dear Lord," she said, her voice barely audible, please watch over Mr. Whitmore? I can see the loneliness in his eyes, the same look my mother had after father passed. Grant him peace, Lord. Help him feel your presence in this beautiful but empty house." She continued praying, asking for blessings of comfort and joy to fill the mansion's halls. Her words were simple but sincere, free from any hint of performance or pretense. Ethan felt an unexpected tightness in his throat, a stinging behind his closed eyes. "And Lord," she added, "if it's not too much to ask, help him to trust again." Sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves become our prison instead. The prayer ended with a soft amen. Maria stood quietly, adjusted the blanket one last time, and picked up her cleaning supplies. She moved toward the door with the same careful steps she'd used all day. At the threshold, she paused. "Good night, Mr. Whitmore," she whispered. "Sleep well." The door closed with a gentle click, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts and the lingering echo of her words. He kept his eyes closed, listening to her footsteps fade down the hall, waiting until he heard the distant sound of the service entrance closing. Only then did he open his eyes, staring at the dark fireplace. His wallet still sat untouched on the coffee table, exactly where he'd left it. The blanket wrapped around him was warm, but it was Maria's prayer that had somehow reached a cold place deep inside him, a place he'd thought was frozen solid. He sat there for a long time, unsettled by the genuine compassion he'd witnessed. It didn't fit with his carefully constructed worldview, where every kindness had strings attached. The simple sincerity of her prayer had cracked something in his carefully maintained armor, letting in a warmth he hadn't felt in years. The grandfather clock struck 9, its chimes resonating through the quiet house. Ethan remained in his chair, the blanket still wrapped around his shoulders, unable to shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in his carefully ordered world. The next morning brought unexpected footsteps to the mansion's marble floors. Maria had arrived with her 7-year-old son, Daniel, apologetically explaining that her usual sitter was sick. Ethan stood in his study doorway, arms crossed, watching as the small boy took in the grandeur of the entrance hall with wide eyes. "I am very sorry, Mr. Whitmore," Maria said softly. "I can find someone else if he can stay," Ethan interrupted, surprising himself. "Just keep him out of trouble." Daniel turned at the sound of Ethan's voice, offering a shy but genuine smile that caught the older man off guard. "Thank you, sir," the boy said politely, his voice clear and earnest. "I promise to be careful with everything." Before Ethan could respond, the clicking of nails on hardwood announced Samson's arrival. The golden retriever trotted into the hall, tail wagging as he investigated the new visitor. Daniel's face lit up, but he looked to his mother first, seeking permission. "May I pet him?" he asked, directing the question to both adults. Ethan nodded, watching as Daniel approached Samson with gentle, careful movements. The dog, usually reserved with strangers, immediately pressed his nose into the boy's outstretched hand. Within moments, Samson was lying on his back, tail thumping against the floor as Daniel scratched his belly. "He likes you," Ethan observed, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. "Dogs can tell if you have a good heart." Daniel replied matter-of-factly, making Ethan's eyebrows rise. "That's what Father Michael says at church." Throughout the morning, Ethan found himself distracted from his work, drawn to watching Daniel and Samson's developing friendship through his study windows. The boy had discovered the garden, with Maria's permission, and was now engaged in an elaborate game of fetch. Samson, who usually tired of the game after a few throws, seemed to have endless energy for his new playmate. The sound of their laughter, Daniel's bright giggles mixing with Samson's excited barks, filtered through the glass, filling the usually quiet house with an unfamiliar warmth. Ethan noticed how naturally Daniel moved through the space, as if the grand estate had been waiting for a child's presence to make it feel truly alive. During her lunch break, Maria sat with Daniel on the garden bench, sharing sandwiches she'd packed. Ethan watched as she wiped a smudge of jelly from her son's cheek, the gesture so tender it made his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't name. The boy leaned into his mother's touch, their affection for each other obvious in every small interaction. As the afternoon progressed, Daniel's presence continued to transform the house in subtle ways. His careful exploration of the mansion's rooms seemed to wake up forgotten corners. He stopped to admire the model ships in the library, asking Samson in a stage whisper if he thought pirates had ever sailed them. The dog's tail wagged in apparent agreement. Even Mrs. Thompson, the cook who rarely smiled, softened when Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway to compliment her cookies. "These taste just like my grandmother's," he told her earnestly, and Ethan noticed how the woman's stern expression melted into pleasure. The boy's politeness wasn't forced or rehearsed. It flowed naturally from what was clearly careful upbringing. He said please and thank you without prompting, and always asked permission before touching anything. When he accidentally knocked over a small vase while reaching to pet Samson, his immediate response was to apologize and offer to help clean up. "Mama says we always have to take responsibility for our mistakes," he explained seriously as Maria helped him gather the pieces. The vase was cheap and easily replaceable, but Ethan found himself touched by the child's sincere concern. As evening approached, Ethan heard Maria calling Daniel to prepare for their departure. The boy gave Samson one final hug, whispering something in the dog's ear that made his tail wag furiously. Then he turned to Ethan, who had been pretending to read near the front door. "Thank you for letting me stay today, Mr. Whitmore," Daniel said, his eyes bright with genuine gratitude. "Your house is beautiful, and Samson is the best dog ever." Ethan cleared his throat, caught off guard by the direct appreciation. "You're welcome," he managed, then added, surprising himself again. "Samson seemed to enjoy your company." Mother and son walked hand in hand down the long driveway, their figures growing smaller in the gathering dusk. Daniel turned once to wave, and Samson whined softly beside Ethan's leg. The sound echoed something in his own chest, a hollow feeling he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge in years. When they finally disappeared from view, the silence that settled over the mansion felt different than usual. Heavier, more noticeable. Samson sat at the window for several minutes, tail still, watching the empty driveway. Ethan understood the feeling. The house, which had always seemed perfectly adequate in its quietness, now felt strangely empty without the sound of a child's laughter echoing through its halls. Autumn sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the mansion, casting long shadows across the polished floors. A week had passed since Daniel's first visit, and the grand house had settled into a new rhythm. The boy's presence, initially, and disruption, had become a quietly accepted part of certain days. Ethan sat in his leather chair, pretending to review investment reports while actually watching Daniel and Samson in the garden. The pair had developed an elaborate routine of games, fetch, hide and seek, and what appeared to be an invented sport involving a tennis ball and increasingly complex rules that only they understood. "He needs the exercise," Ethan had told Maria that morning when she'd apologized again for bringing Daniel. "Samson's getting lazy in his old age." They both knew it wasn't true. The dog was only 5 years old and as energetic as ever. But Maria had simply nodded, a small smile touching her lips. The truth was, the house felt different when Daniel visited. Lighter somehow, as if the boy's presence drove back the shadows that had collected in the corners over the years. Even the staff moved differently on these days, their steps a little lighter, their faces softer. Today, Maria worked in the library, methodically dusting the countless leather-bound volumes that lined the walls. Daniel had promised to stay within Samson's sight in the garden, and Ethan could hear the occasional burst of laughter floating through the open window. As she worked, Maria began to sing softly, perhaps thinking she was alone. The melody was gentle, a Spanish hymn that floated through the air like a familiar perfume. Ethan, passing by the library door, stopped mid-step as if he'd walked into an invisible wall. The song. He knew that song. His hands began to tremble as memories crashed over him like waves. Isabella, his late wife, singing that same hymn while tending to her roses. Her voice, sweet and clear, carrying across their first small apartment before the money came. The way she'd sung it to their children when they were small. before everything changed. Más cerca, oh Dios, de ti, más cerca sí. Maria's voice, though different from Isabella's, carried the same tender reverence. The same faith that had drawn him to his wife all those years ago, before wealth and suspicion had hardened his heart. Ethan's legs felt weak. He leaned against the doorframe, watching Maria work. She moved with the same grace Isabella had possessed, treating each object with gentle respect. The parallel struck him with such force that he had to close his eyes. Through the window came Daniel's laugh again, followed by Samson's joyful bark. The sound mingled with Maria's singing, creating a moment so peaceful it made Ethan's chest ache. When was the last time his home had felt this alive? The familiar walls of suspicion he'd built around his heart began to crack. Maria continued to sing, unaware of his presence or the effect she was having. She reached up to dust a higher shelf, the morning light catching the silver cross she wore, so similar to the one Isabella had never taken off. Isabella, he whispered, the name feeling strange on his lips after so long of trying not to speak it. The song continued, wrapping around him like a warm embrace from the past. For the first time in years, the memories brought comfort instead of pain. A sudden crash from the garden broke the spell. Daniel and Samson had apparently knocked over a flower pot in their play. Maria's song stopped as she turned toward the window, concern crossing her face. "It's all right," Ethan found himself saying, his voice rougher than usual. "Let them play." Maria jumped slightly, noticing him for the first time. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm sorry. I didn't realize." She gestured vaguely at herself, perhaps referring to the singing. "Please," he said, surprising them both. "Continue." He couldn't bring himself to explain why the song meant so much to him, but something in his expression must have conveyed its importance. Maria nodded slowly and resumed her work, her voice lifting once again in the ancient hymn. Ethan remained in the doorway, letting the melody wash over him. The suspicious part of his mind tried to raise questions. How did she know this song? Why did she remind him so much of Isabella? But for once, he pushed those thoughts aside. Instead, he allowed himself to simply exist in this moment. The sun warming the library's wooden floors, Daniel's laughter floating through the window, Samson's happy barks punctuating the piece, and Maria's gentle voice singing the hymn that had once meant everything to him. For the first time since Isabella's death, Ethan felt something inside him begin to thaw. The kitchen glowed with warm light from the copper pendant lamps hanging above the granite island. Outside, darkness had settled over the estate grounds, making the kitchen windows reflect the cozy scene within like mirrors. The aroma of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies filled the air, mingling with the lingering scent of the pot roast from dinner. Ethan sat at the kitchen island, his reading glasses perched on his nose, while 7-year-old Daniel swung his legs from the stool beside him. Maria moved quietly around them, loading the dishwasher and wiping down countertops with practiced efficiency. And then, Ethan continued, his eyes twinkling with rare mischief. "My brother Tommy and I painted that poor chicken bright blue. We thought Grandma would never notice." Daniel giggled, cookie crumbs dusting his chin. "Did you get in trouble?" "Oh, you bet we did." Ethan chuckled, reaching for his teacup. "Grandma made us wash that chicken every day for a week until the paint wore off." Poor thing looked like a sad rain cloud by the end. Maria smiled softly as she worked, stealing glances at the unlikely pair. She'd never seen Ethan so animated, telling stories and actually laughing. The stern businessman had gradually disappeared over the past few weeks, replaced by someone warmer, someone who seemed to shed years when Daniel was around. "Tell another one," Daniel pleaded, reaching for another cookie. Ah, Maria interjected gently. "That's your third one, Maijo. No more sugar before bed." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Just one more story then. Did I ever tell you about the time Tommy and I tried to build a tree house? Without any tools?" Daniel scooted closer, his eyes wide with anticipation. The boy's small hand rested on Ethan's arm with natural familiarity, and Ethan didn't flinch away as he once might have. Maria noticed how her son's dark curls caught the light, so similar to the old photographs of Ethan she'd seen in the library. "We thought we could just stack the boards like building blocks," Ethan continued, gesturing with his hands. Ended up with a pile of lumber and a very angry father when he found his good sheets tied between trees like some kind of circus tent. Daniel's laughter bubbled up, pure and sweet. He leaned in closer to Ethan, his small face serious despite his giggles. "You're funny," he said, then lowered his voice to what he probably thought was a whisper but was still clearly audible in the quiet kitchen. "Mommy says you're my daddy." The teacup in Ethan's hands slipped, hitting the granite countertop with a sharp crack before shattering on the kitchen floor. Hot tea splashed across the tiles. The silence that followed was deafening. Maria froze by the sink, the dish towel falling from her nerveless fingers. All the color drained from her face as she stared at her son in horror. "Daniel," she whispered, but no other words would come. Ethan's hands gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white. "What did you say?" His voice was barely controlled, tension radiating from every line of his body. Daniel looked between them, suddenly uncertain. I heard Mommy praying last night. She was asking God to help her tell you the truth." His lower lip trembled. "Did I say something bad?" Maria finally found her voice. "Daniel, honey, please go up to the guest room and get ready for bed. I'll be there in a minute. But now, Miho, please." Daniel slid off the stool, his small shoulders hunched as he hurried from the kitchen. His footsteps echoed on the stairs, each one driving home the weight of the moment. Ethan stood slowly, turning to face Maria. His face had hardened into the mask she remembered from her first days working at the mansion. "The truth," he said, the words sharp as broken glass. "Now." Maria's hands twisted together, her whole body trembling. The secret she'd carried for 8 years pressed against her chest like a physical weight. I worked here before," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "as a temporary maid, just for 2 weeks, 8 years ago." Ethan's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed. "Go on." "It was right after Mrs. Isabella passed away. You were," she swallowed hard, "you were drinking a lot then. There was one night. You were so sad, talking about your wife, about feeling alone." Tears filled her eyes. "I shouldn't have. We shouldn't have. But you seemed so lost. And I thought maybe I could help. Just for a moment." The color drained from Ethan's face as fragments of memory began to surface, a warm touch in the darkness. Comfort offered and taken in equal measure, the scent of lemon furniture polish and gentle hands. "No," he whispered. "I left the next day." Maria continued, her voice breaking. "I couldn't face. I didn't want you to think I was trying to take advantage. When I found out I was pregnant, I promised myself I would never tell you. You were grieving, and it wasn't real. I didn't want to complicate your life." Broken porcelain crunched under Ethan's feet as he took a step back. "All this time," he said, his voice harsh with disbelief, "you've been working here for weeks, watching me with him, letting me think." His hands clenched into fists. "How dare you keep this from me?" Tea spread across the floor between them like a widening gulf. Maria lifted her chin, though tears streamed down her face. "I didn't come back for money, Mr. Whitmore. I needed work, and the agency sent me here. I tried to refuse, but they insisted. I've been trying to find the courage to tell you, to find the right moment." "The right moment?" Ethan's voice rose. "When exactly is the right moment to tell a man he has a 7-year-old son? When were you planning to mention this small detail?" A small sound from the doorway made them both turn. Daniel stood there in his pajamas, his face wet with tears. "Please don't yell at Mommy," he said, his voice small but determined. "She always says you're a good man. That's why she prays for you every night." The sight of his son, looking at him with Isabella's same determination knocked the breath from Ethan's lungs. All the pieces suddenly fell into place. The familiar way Daniel moved, the shape of his smile, the natural way he'd fit into the house from the very first day. How had he not seen it? "The truth," he said again, but this time the word held different weight. "I want the whole truth, everything." Maria nodded slowly, her tears still falling. "Yes," she whispered, "you deserve that much. You both do." The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. marking the moment when everything changed. Outside, clouds parted to reveal a full moon, its light spilling across the kitchen floor, illuminating the shattered pieces of what had been and the uncertain shape of what was to come. The kitchen fell into a devastating silence. The shattered teacup lay scattered across the floor, tiny porcelain fragments glinting under the warm lights like broken promises. Maria's hands trembled as she gripped the dishcloth, her knuckles white with tension. "What did you say?" Ethan's voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. Daniel, suddenly aware of the changed atmosphere, looked between the two adults with wide, uncertain eyes. "Did I say something wrong?" Maria rushed forward, her shoes crunching on the broken pieces. "Daniel, honey, why don't you go play with Samson in the living room for a few minutes?" "But, please, Mijo, just for a little while." Daniel slid off the stool, casting one last worried glance at Ethan before padding out of the kitchen. The sound of his footsteps faded, followed by Samson's eager bark of greeting from the other room. Ethan stood slowly, his face ashen. "Explain, now." Maria's shoulders slumped as she leaned against the counter for support. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced herself to meet Ethan's gaze. It was 7 years ago, at the Grand Plaza Hotel in the city. I worked there as a housekeeper. Recognition flickered across Ethan's face, followed by confusion. The Grand Plaza. That was where I stayed after Sarah's funeral, for almost a month. "Yes," Maria whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. "You were so kind to me that night, so gentle. You were hurting so much, and I was alone in a new country, scared and desperate." Ethan's hands gripped the edge of the counter as fragments of memory began to surface. A warm summer night, too much scotch. A gentle voice offering comfort in his darkest hour. "I barely remember. I was drunk, grieving. You talked about your wife," Maria continued, her voice trembling. "About how much you missed her. We both needed someone that night, just to feel less alone. And Daniel," Ethan's voice cracked, "I didn't know I was pregnant until weeks later. By then, you were gone. I didn't even know your full name until I saw your picture in the paper years later." Maria wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold herself together. "I never planned to tell you. I made a good life for us, worked hard, but when the agency sent me here..." "You knew?" Ethan's voice rose sharply. "You knew who I was when you took this job?" "No," Maria protested, fresh tears spilling. "I mean, yes, but not at first. The agency just gave me an address. When I arrived that first day and saw you..." She drew a shaky breath. "I almost ran away, but I needed the work, and I thought maybe it was God's plan, that Daniel should at least get to know his father, even if you never knew the truth." Ethan pushed away from the counter, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. His mind raced through the past few weeks. Daniel's familiar smile, the way he laughed, his natural ease with Samson. How had he not seen it? The boy had his mother's coloring, but those eyes, they were Whitmore eyes, through and through. 7 years, he said, his voice hollow. 7 years. I had a son I never knew about. While my other children were taking advantage of me, there was a boy out there who actually needed me, and "I'm so sorry," Maria whispered. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I'll pack our things right now and..." "No." Ethan's command stopped her mid-sentence. "You're not going anywhere. Not until we sort this out." He ran a hand through his silver hair, his shoulders heavy with the weight of this revelation. "Does anyone else know?" Maria shook her head. "Only my priest. He's helped us through the years, kept our secret." From the living room came the sound of Daniel's laughter, followed by Samson's playful bark. The ordinary, joyful sound felt surreal against the gravity of their conversation. Ethan swallowed hard. "I need time to think. To process this." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Stay here, both of you. Use the guest room upstairs. We'll figure this out in the morning." Maria nodded mutely, watching as Ethan walked out of the kitchen with measured steps that spoke of barely contained emotion. She could hear his footsteps on the stairs, heading toward his study, each step echoing like a judgment. In his study, Ethan went straight to his desk, where a silver frame held the last photo taken of Sarah. Her smile, so warm and knowing, seemed to pierce right through him. He sank into his leather chair, picking up the frame with trembling hands. "What have I done?" he whispered to the photograph, his voice breaking. "Sarah, what have I done?" The photo offered no answers, only Sarah's eternal smile, watching as tears finally broke through Ethan's carefully maintained control. Outside his study window, the autumn wind stirred the leaves, and somewhere in the house, a little boy who shared his blood played with a dog, unaware that his innocent words had just changed everything forever. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Ethan Whitmore's mansion, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. The house felt different now, charged with an uncomfortable electricity that made every movement feel deliberate and cautious. Ethan sat in his study, attempting to focus on the financial reports spread across his desk, but his mind kept wandering to last night's revelation. The soft patter of small feet in the hallway made him tense. He heard Daniel before he saw him, the boy's footsteps hesitant but determined. When the 7-year-old appeared in the doorway, Ethan noticed he was clutching something to his chest. "Mr. Whitmore." Daniel's voice was small but clear. "I found this in the living room." He held up an ornate wooden chess set, its pieces gleaming with age and care. "Do you know how to play?" Ethan's throat tightened. The chess set had been a gift from his own father, decades ago. "Yes," he managed. "I do." "Could you?" Daniel shifted from foot to foot, his eyes bright with hope. "Could you teach me?" The request hung in the air between them. Ethan's first instinct was to refuse, to maintain the distance that felt safer after yesterday's shocking revelation. But something in Daniel's expression, that mixture of innocence and earnest desire to learn, made it impossible to say no. "Very well," Ethan heard himself say. "Bring it here." Daniel's face lit up with joy as he carefully carried the chess set to Ethan's desk. Together, they cleared a space and began setting up the pieces. Ethan found himself explaining each one's name and movement pattern, surprised by how naturally the words came. "The pawn can only move forward, one square at a time," Ethan demonstrated, his fingers gentle on the carved piece, "except for its first move, when it can go 2 squares if you want." Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the desk, completely absorbed. "Like taking baby steps?" A smile tugged at Ethan's lips despite himself. "Yes, exactly like that." As the morning progressed, Ethan discovered that Daniel was an exceptionally quick study. The boy's face scrunched up in concentration as he considered each move, and his delighted laugh when he successfully captured one of Ethan's pieces was infectious. "Check," Daniel announced proudly, moving his knight into position. "That's right, isn't it?" "Indeed it is," Ethan confirmed, genuinely impressed. "You're learning very fast." Unknown to both of them, Maria stood quietly in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. Her hands were clasped together in silent prayer, tears gathering in her eyes at the sight of father and son together, even if one of them didn't fully accept that reality yet. The morning light had shifted to afternoon warmth when Daniel finally captured Ethan's king. His victory dance, a mixture of jumping and spinning, made even Ethan chuckle. "I did it. I really did it." Daniel beamed. "You certainly did," Ethan agreed, beginning to reset the board. "Would you like to play another game?" "Yes, please." Daniel paused, then added softly, "Thank you for teaching me, Mr. Whitmore." Something in Ethan's chest constricted at the formality of the address. This boy, his son, calling him Mr. Whitmore suddenly felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. They played 2 more games, and with each passing hour, Ethan found himself relaxing more. He shared stories about learning chess from his own father, and Daniel listened with rapt attention, asking questions and sharing his own observations about the game. As evening approached, Maria finally stepped into the study. "Daniel, it's time to help me prepare dinner. Can we play again tomorrow?" Daniel asked Ethan hopefully. Ethan glanced at Maria, then back at the boy. "We'll see," he said softly. After Daniel left the room, Ethan remained seated, staring at the chess set. His fingers traced the smooth wooden pieces, remembering the sound of Daniel's laughter, the bright flash of his smile, the keen intelligence in his eyes. In the quiet of his study, As night began to fall, Ethan finally allowed himself to acknowledge what he'd been fighting all day. He enjoyed the boy's presence. More than that, he looked forward to their next game, to seeing that spark of understanding when Daniel grasped a new concept, to hearing his unrestrained joy at each small victory. The realization brought with it a new fear, one that settled deep in his chest. The thought of losing this newfound connection, of returning to the hollow silence that had defined his life before, suddenly seemed unbearable. Ethan sat in his leather chair, surrounded by the trappings of his wealth, and for the first time in years, he felt the true weight of what he stood to lose. Not his money or his reputation, but something far more precious, the chance to know his son. The morning sun cast long shadows across Ethan's study as he watched Maria dusting the bookshelves. His fingers drummed against his mahogany desk, the envelope before him containing $5,000 in crisp $100 bills. "Maria," he called out, his voice carefully neutral. "Would you come here for a moment?" She set down her feathered duster and approached his desk, her steps quiet but steady. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore?" Ethan pushed the envelope across the polished surface. "Given our situation, I thought this might make things easier for you and Daniel." Maria's eyes fell to the envelope, understanding dawning on her face. She didn't reach for it. Instead, she clasped her hands together, her posture straight despite her simple maid's uniform. "Mr. Whitmore," she said softly but firmly, "I cannot accept this." "Don't be foolish," Ethan said, his tone sharpening. "You're raising a child alone. This could help with his education, better clothes." "What Daniel needs most," Maria interrupted gently, "is dignity and a mother who shows him how to live with honor." She took a deep breath. "I don't want your money, Mr. Whitmore. I never did. All I want is to work honestly and give my son a chance at a better life." Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her face for any sign of deception. "Most people aren't so quick to refuse money." "I am not most people," Maria replied, a quiet strength in her voice. "And Daniel deserves to learn that worth isn't measured in dollars." As if to prove her point, that afternoon Maria sat at the kitchen table during her lunch break, carefully stitching Daniel's worn backpack. Ethan passed by and paused in the doorway, watching as she worked the needle through the frayed fabric with practiced care. "That looks beyond repair," he observed. "The store in town has new ones." Maria smiled, not looking up from her work. "This one still has life in it. Besides, Daniel drew these little stars himself." She pointed to several wobbly stars drawn in marker near the bottom. "He's proud of them." Later that day, delicious aromas began wafting from the kitchen. Ethan found Maria preparing more food than usual, her movements efficient as she worked between multiple pots and pans. "I hope you don't mind," she said when she noticed him. "I always cook extra on Wednesdays. The shelter downtown serves dinner to families in need, and I like to contribute when I can." Ethan watched as she carefully portioned out servings into containers. "You cook for the shelter? On your wages?" Maria's hands never stopped moving as she responded. "God has blessed me with enough to share, and cooking a little extra costs very little." She glanced at him. "Would you like to try some? I made plenty." Before he could respond, she was already setting a plate for him at the kitchen island. The simple act of sharing her food, not as his paid help but as one human being to another, struck him deeply. The meal was simple but delicious. Rice, beans, and tender chicken in a sauce that reminded him of sunshine and distant places. As he ate, Maria continued working, humming softly as she packed the remaining portions. "My mother taught me this recipe," she said quietly. "She always said food made with love feeds more than just the body." Throughout the week, Ethan noticed more instances of Maria's quiet generosity. She mended Samson's old dog bed instead of suggesting a new one. When the gardener's young daughter stopped by, Maria shared cookies she'd baked with Daniel. She even stayed late one evening to help the elderly cleaning woman with her heavy tasks, refusing extra pay for the time. Each act of selflessness chipped away at Ethan's walls of suspicion. He began to see that Maria's dignity wasn't a facade. It was the foundation of her character, as natural to her as breathing. One evening, as Maria prepared to leave, Ethan noticed her shoes were wearing thin. The envelope of money still sat in his desk drawer, untouched. His respect for her had grown into something he couldn't quite name, though his pride kept him from voicing it. Instead, he gruffly said, "You did good work today, Maria." She smiled, understanding the unspoken appreciation in his words. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. Will you be joining us for dinner tomorrow? Daniel is hoping to show you how he's practiced his chess moves." Ethan nodded, watching as she gathered her things. Her worn shoes made soft sounds on his expensive marble floors, but she walked with the grace of a queen. In that moment, he realized that true dignity had nothing to do with wealth. It was something far more valuable, something Maria possessed in abundance. The envelope remained in his drawer, a reminder that some things couldn't be bought with money. Maria had taught him that lesson without saying a word, and though he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge it aloud, his respect for her grew deeper with each passing day. The autumn sun painted golden streaks across the church parking lot as Ethan pulled up in his Mercedes. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, betraying his nervousness about attending the annual fall picnic. It had been years since he'd joined any community events, preferring the solitude of his mansion. But something had changed. Maria sat in the passenger seat, her Sunday dress modest but pretty, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt. In the back seat, Daniel bounced with excitement, his new sweater slightly too big, a gift from Ethan that Maria had initially tried to refuse. "Look at all the balloons." Daniel pressed his face against the window, pointing at the colorful decorations dotting the church lawn. Ethan cleared his throat. "Well, we should probably." He trailed off, uncertain. Maria gave him a gentle smile. "Thank you for inviting us, Mr. Whitmore. Please," he said softly, "call me Ethan. At least today." They stepped out into the crisp air, the scent of barbecue and fresh-baked pies drifting across the grounds. Church members milled about, setting up tables and arranging food. Daniel spotted other children playing near the swing set and looked questioningly at his mother. "Go ahead, mijito." Maria nodded, "but be careful with your nice sweater." They watched as Daniel ran off, immediately welcomed by the other kids. A warmth spread through Ethan's chest as he saw how easily his son, the thought still felt strange, integrated with the group. Pastor John approached them, his kind eyes crinkling with genuine pleasure. "Ethan, what a wonderful surprise to see you here." He turned to Maria. "And Maria, Daniel, it's so good to have you all." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I thought. That is, it seemed. We're very happy to be here." Maria saved him, her quiet confidence in social situations surprising him. Throughout the afternoon, Ethan watched as Maria moved through the crowd with natural grace. She helped the women arranging desserts, offered to watch young children so other mothers could eat, and shared recipes with the church ladies who praised her famous empanada. Her genuine warmth drew people to her, and Ethan realized she'd built a community here long before she'd entered his life. "She's quite something, isn't she?" Pastor John had appeared beside Ethan, who stood watching Maria laugh with a group of women. "Yes, she is." Ethan couldn't deny it. "She's nothing like I expected." "And what did you expect, Ethan?" The question hung in the air, making Ethan uncomfortable with his previous suspicions. Before he could answer, Daniel came running up, his face flushed with joy. "Dad, I mean, Mr. Whitmore." Daniel caught himself, but the slip made Ethan's heart skip. "Come see the fort we built." Without thinking, Ethan let himself be pulled along by the small hand in his. The other children welcomed him into their game, and soon he found himself helping them strengthen their makeshift fort with fallen branches. Their laughter was infectious, and Ethan couldn't remember the last time he'd smiled so much. Maria watched from a distance, her eyes misting as she saw Ethan on his knees, playing with the children as if he'd done it all his life. She said a silent prayer of gratitude, hope blooming in her heart. Later, as families gathered for the meal, Pastor John said grace. Ethan sat with Maria and Daniel at a picnic table, feeling strangely complete. Daniel told animated stories about his fort-building adventures, while Maria quietly made sure both boys, father and son, had enough to eat. "You three look natural together," Pastor John remarked as he passed by their table. "Like a family should." The words hung in the air, but instead of the usual panic Ethan felt at such suggestions, he found himself considering them. He watched as Maria wiped a smudge of chocolate from Daniel's cheek, the boy giggling and squirming away. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the church grounds, families started packing up. Daniel had made new friends, exchanging promises to play again soon. Maria helped with the cleanup, refusing to leave until everything was in order, her inherent thoughtfulness showing in every action. The drive home was quiet but comfortable. Daniel dozed in the back seat, clutching a balloon someone had given him. Ethan caught Maria's reflection in the rearview mirror, her soft smile, the peaceful contentment on her face. Something shifted in his chest, an overwhelming sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. Looking at them both, Ethan realized that maybe family wasn't about suspicion and ulterior motives. Maybe it was about moments like these. Simple, genuine, warm. The thought both terrified and thrilled him, but as he drove through the gathering dusk, he found himself looking forward to whatever tomorrow might bring. The Mercedes wound its way through the quiet streets, carrying its precious cargo home. In the rearview mirror, Maria's smile remained, a gentle reminder that sometimes the best things in life come unexpectedly, wrapped in the simple package of a church picnic and a child's laughter. The autumn morning started peacefully enough at the Whitmore estate. Maria hummed softly while arranging fresh flowers in the entrance hall. Daniel sat at the kitchen table working on his homework, and Ethan reviewed documents in his study. Even Samson seemed content, dozing in a patch of sunlight near Daniel's feet. The sharp sound of tires on gravel broke the tranquil scene. Through the large front windows, Maria saw an expensive black SUV pull up to the mansion. Her heart skipped a beat as two well-dressed figures emerged. A man and woman who carried themselves with the same commanding presence as Ethan. Before Maria could retreat to the kitchen, the front door burst open. Olivia Whitmore strode in first, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor, followed closely by her brother Grant. Their faces were tight with barely contained fury. "Where is he?" Olivia demanded, her voice echoing through the hall. Her gaze landed on Maria, and her lip curled. Where's our father?" Maria straightened her spine, though her hands trembled slightly. "Mr. Whitmore is in his study. Should I?" "Don't bother." Grant cut in coldly. "We know the way." They brushed past her, but not before Olivia knocked against the vase Maria had just arranged, sending water splashing across the antique table. Maria quickly grabbed a cloth to clean it, her cheeks burning as she heard them storming toward Ethan's study. "Father!" Olivia's voice carried through the house. "We need to talk. Now." In the kitchen, Daniel looked up from his homework, his eyes wide. "Mama, who's shouting?" "It's okay, mijito," Maria assured him, though her heart was racing. "Just stay here with Samson." The golden retriever had already moved closer to Daniel, sensing the tension in the air. Maria hurried toward the study, knowing she should be present for whatever was coming. She arrived just as the confrontation began. Ethan stood behind his desk, looking startled at his children's sudden appearance. "Olivia? Grant? What's the meaning of this?" "The meaning?" Olivia's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Maybe you'd like to explain why the country club is buzzing with rumors about your new family." Grant stepped forward, his voice controlled but cold. "We had to hear from the Hendersons, of all people, that you've been parading around town with your maid and her convenient little son." Maria felt her face flush hot with shame, but she forced herself to stand tall in the doorway. Ethan's eyes flickered to her, then away just as quickly. "This is hardly an appropriate way to discuss private matters," Ethan said stiffly. "Private?" Olivia whirled to face Maria. "There's nothing private about a gold digger worming her way into our father's life, using a child as bait." "That's enough," Ethan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maria's hands clenched at her sides. "I have never." "Save it," Grant interrupted. "We've seen this before. Every few years, someone tries to take advantage of our father's loneliness." His tone made the words sound dirty. "But this? Using a child? That's a new low." "Daniel is your brother," Maria said quietly, finding strength in speaking the truth. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Olivia laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Oh, that's rich. Father, surely you're not falling for this." Ethan's hands gripped the edge of his desk. "The situation is complicated." "Complicated?" Grant's eyebrows rose. "It's quite simple, actually. She's after the money. Our inheritance." Maria felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. "Not here. Not now. I have never asked for money. I work honestly for my wages, nothing more." "Right," Olivia sneered. "You just happened to bring your son here, knowing exactly who our father was, planning this whole thing." "I didn't plan anything," Maria protested, but her voice was drowning in their accusations. "Father," Grant said, his tone reasonable now, calculating. "You need to think about what you're doing, about the family name, about everything Mother built with you." Maria saw Ethan flinch at the mention of his late wife. Her heart sank as she watched him struggle, his face a mask of confusion and conflict. Ethan began, then stopped. His eyes met Maria's for a brief moment before sliding away. "Perhaps we should all take some time to, Mama?" Daniel's small voice came from the hallway. Samson stood beside him, tail low, sensing the hostility in the room. Olivia's face twisted. "Oh, perfect timing, the star of the show." "Don't," Maria said sharply, moving to shield her son. "He's just a child. He's a prop in your little scheme," Grant said coldly. Maria felt something break inside her. She looked at Ethan, silently pleading for him to say something, to defend his son, to acknowledge the truth they all knew. But he stood frozen behind his desk, trapped between his children's anger and his own fear. "I see," Maria whispered. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. "Come, Daniel, we're leaving." "But Mama." "Now, mijito." She took his hand, gentle despite her trembling. Samson whined, moving to follow them, but Olivia blocked his path. "The dog stays." Maria didn't argue. She guided Daniel through the house, past the flowers she'd arranged that morning, past the homework still spread on the kitchen table. She could hear Olivia and Grant's voices rising again behind them, but she didn't stop to listen. Her old car seemed small and shabby compared to the gleaming SUV parked in the drive, but it had never failed her. She helped Daniel into his seat, making sure he was secure before closing the door. Through the mansion's windows, she could see Ethan watching them. He looked lost, diminished somehow, nothing like the strong man who'd played with Daniel at the church picnic just days ago. Samson pressed his nose against the glass beside him, whining softly. As Maria drove away, she caught one last glimpse in her rearview mirror. Ethan standing in his doorway, Samson at his feet, both of them growing smaller until they disappeared completely. Only then did she allow herself to really cry, her tears falling silently so Daniel wouldn't see. "Mama?" Daniel's voice was small and confused. "Why are those people so angry? Why didn't Dad say anything?" Maria couldn't answer. She just drove on, leaving behind the grand estate and the man who'd chosen silence over truth, while the weight of his cowardice settled over the mansion like a heavy shroud. The morning sun crept through the grand windows of the mansion, but its warmth couldn't chase away the cold emptiness that filled every room. Ethan Whitmore stood in the doorway of his kitchen, staring at the spot where Maria usually prepared breakfast, humming her gentle hymns. Now there was only silence. His footsteps echoed against the hardwood floors as he wandered from room to room. The house felt bigger somehow, more hollow. Samson, his golden retriever, followed close behind, his nails clicking against the floor, his head hanging low as if he too felt the weight of their absence. In the living room, dust motes danced in the morning light, dust that Maria would have already cleaned away by now. The cushions on the couch still held the slight impression where Daniel liked to sit and read his picture books. Ethan's chest tightened at the memory of the boy's bright eyes and curious questions. "What have I done?" he whispered to the empty room. His gaze drifted to the fireplace mantel, and there, partially hidden behind a crystal vase, stood a small plastic toy soldier. Daniel must have left it behind in their hurried departure. Ethan's hands trembled as he picked up the tiny figure. A brave little soldier, painted in green and brown, one arm raised in eternal salute. The weight of the small toy in his palm broke something inside him. His legs gave way, and he sank into his leather armchair, clutching the soldier to his chest. The tears came suddenly, violently, years of stored emotion finally breaking free. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry." Samson whined and pressed his wet nose against Ethan's knee. The dog had grown so fond of Daniel, spending hours playing fetch in the garden or lying patiently while the boy read stories aloud. Now he seemed lost without his young friend. Ethan's mind wandered to yesterday's confrontation. He could still see the hurt in Maria's eyes when his children had hurled their accusations. Olivia and Grant, so quick to judge, so eager to protect their inheritance, they'd become exactly what he'd always feared money would make them. And he, their father, had stood there in cowardly silence while they attacked an innocent woman, Maria, who had never asked for anything. Maria, who worked with quiet dignity and prayed for his happiness. Maria, who had raised their son alone for 7 years without ever seeking him out for money or support. The toy soldier's edges pressed into his palm. What kind of man was he, to let pride and fear destroy this precious chance at happiness? What kind of father would choose protecting his reputation over defending his own son? For the first time since his wife's passing, Ethan Whitmore slid from his chair onto his knees. The morning light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor as he bowed his head in prayer. "Lord," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "I've been such a fool, such a proud, stubborn fool." The words came slowly at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. "I've spent years building walls, protecting myself from hurt, from trust, from love. And when you sent me a miracle, a son, a chance at family again, I let my fear destroy it." Tears rolled down his weathered cheeks as he continued, "Please forgive me. Please help me make this right. Show me the way to fix what I've broken." Samson settled beside him, laying his head on Ethan's knee as the old man poured out his heart. The morning light grew stronger, filling the room with warmth as Ethan remained on his knees, praying for guidance, for courage, for the strength to choose love over pride. When he finally opened his eyes, his knees ached from the hard floor, but his heart felt lighter. The toy soldier still rested in his palm, its tiny face seeming to look up at him expectantly. Ethan carefully placed it in his pocket, a reminder of what truly mattered. Rising slowly to his feet, Ethan walked to his late wife's portrait above the fireplace. "You would have loved them both," he said softly. "You would have shown me how to love them properly from the start." He touched the frame gently. "Help me be brave enough to try again." Moving with newfound purpose, Ethan strode to his study. His reflection in the window showed a changed man, eyes red from crying but filled with determination. He wouldn't let fear win this time. He wouldn't let his children's bitterness poison this precious gift he'd been given. "Come on, old boy," he said to Samson, who perked up at his master's stronger voice. "We have a family to fight for." Ethan pulled out his phone, his hands steady now, as he dialed his lawyer's number. Whatever it took, whatever bridges he had to build or walls he had to tear down, he would make this right. The toy soldier pressed against his heart through his pocket, a constant reminder of the little boy who had changed everything. He would find Maria and Daniel. He would humble himself and beg their forgiveness. He would stand up to his older children and defend what mattered most. Money, pride, reputation, none of it meant anything compared to the love of a family. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky as Ethan Whitmore, changed man and repentant father, began to plan how he would win back the precious gift he'd so carelessly thrown away. The wooden steps of St. Matthew's Church creaked under Ethan's feet as he climbed them slowly, his heart heavy with purpose. The morning service had just ended, and scattered groups of congregants filtered out through the heavy oak doors, their voices hushed as they noticed the well-dressed stranger in their midst. Inside, the church smelled of old wood and burning candles. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows across empty pews. Pastor John stood near the altar, gathering his sermon notes, but looked up at the sound of Ethan's footsteps echoing through the quiet sanctuary. Mr. Whitmore, Pastor John said, his voice gentle but carrying a note of concern. I wondered if we might be seeing you. Ethan's fingers brushed against the toy soldier in his pocket as he approached. Pastor, I need to find them. Maria and Daniel, I've made a terrible mistake. The pastor studied him carefully, noting the dark circles under Ethan's eyes, and the way his usually pristine suit looked slightly rumpled, as if he'd slept in it. They're hurting, Mr. Whitmore. Maria was in tears during yesterday's evening prayer service. Shame burned through Ethan's chest. I know. I should have defended them. I should have. His voice cracked. Please, Pastor, I need to make this right. Pastor John set his papers down and folded his hands. They're staying at the Good Shepherd shelter on Oak Street. We maintain it for families in need. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Maria didn't want to impose on anyone else, even though several congregation members offered their homes. That was so like her, Ethan thought. Even in crisis, she maintained her dignity and independence. The trait he'd once viewed with suspicion now filled him with admiration. Thank you, Ethan said, already turning to leave. Mr. Whitmore, Pastor John called after him. Remember, sometimes the greatest act of strength is showing our weakness. Pride has no place in matters of the heart. Ethan nodded, the words settling deep in his soul as he hurried back to his car. The leather seats felt cold and empty without Daniel's excited chatter from the back, or Maria's quiet presence beside him. He started the engine, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled away from the church. As he drove through familiar streets that somehow looked different today, memories washed over him like waves. Daniel's face lighting up when he made his first chess move correctly. The boy's infectious giggle when Samson licked his face. The way he'd lean against Ethan's arm during their evening reading sessions, trust and affection radiating from his small frame. At a red light, Ethan's mind drifted to Maria's soft singing in the library, that Spanish hymn that had first cracked his carefully constructed walls. He remembered how she'd looked at the church picnic, relaxed and smiling, her usual shyness melting away as she chatted with other mothers. How natural it had felt, the three of them together, like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their proper place. The GPS directed him toward a part of town he rarely visited, where neat but modest homes lined narrower streets. Each mile brought a new memory. Maria teaching Daniel to say grace before meals, her gentle corrections when he spoke too loudly in the house, the quiet strength she showed every day while working to give her son a better life. Ethan's throat tightened as he recalled Daniel's innocent words that had changed everything. Mommy says you're my daddy. Such simple truth from a child's lips, and he'd let fear and pride ruin that precious moment. The Good Shepherd shelter appeared ahead, a plain 3-story building with faded brick walls and a small playground to one side. A few children played there under the watchful eyes of volunteers, their laughter carrying across the parking lot. Ethan's heart clenched, wondering if Daniel was among them. He pulled into an empty space and turned off the engine, but couldn't make himself leave the car just yet. His fingers found the toy soldier in his pocket. Such a small thing to represent such enormous hope. Daniel had left it behind in his haste to leave. This tiny plastic guardian that had watched over their chess games and story times. Through the windshield, Ethan studied the shelter's modest entrance. Somewhere behind those doors were the two people who had brought light and warmth back into his life. The two people he'd failed to protect when they needed him most. The family he didn't know he had until it was almost too late. He clutched the toy soldier tighter, drawing strength from its presence. Pride had cost him his relationship with his older children, had left him isolated in his mansion with only wealth for company. He couldn't let it cost him this second chance at love and family. The morning sun reflected off the shelter's windows, reminding him of how Maria's eyes would shine when Daniel made her proud. Ethan took a deep breath, preparing himself for what came next. The toy soldier pressed against his palm like a promise to be better, to be braver, to be the father and man they deserved. The evening sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Church Hall, casting rainbow patterns across the worn linoleum floor. Maria stood behind a long folding table, ladling hot soup into paper bowls. Her hands moved with practiced grace, but her eyes were distant, clouded with the weight of recent memories. "Here you go, Mr. Thompson," she said softly, passing a steaming bowl to an elderly man in a threadbare coat. "Careful, it's hot." Daniel sat at a corner table, his homework spread before him, occasionally glancing up to watch his mother work. The past few days at the shelter had been hard on him. She could tell by the way his usual bright smile had dimmed just a little. The heavy wooden doors creaked open, letting in a rush of cool autumn air. Maria looked up, more out of habit than interest, and froze. There, in the doorway, stood Ethan Whitmore. The bustling dinner service ground to a halt. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the clinking of spoons against bowls seemed to pause. Everyone knew Maria's story by now. The whole congregation had rallied around her when she'd arrived at their door in tears 3 nights ago. Ethan stood there, looking nothing like the proud millionaire who usually commanded every room. His silver hair was uncombed, his expensive suit wrinkled. In his hand, he clutched something small, a toy soldier that made Maria's heart catch in her throat. "Maria," he said, his voice rough with emotion. His eyes, usually so sharp and judging, were red, rimmed, and vulnerable. She gripped the soup ladle tighter, her knuckles turning white. "Mr. Whitmore, But before she could finish, Ethan did something that made several people gasp. He walked forward and fell to his knees right there on the linoleum floor, his head bowed. "I've been such a fool," he said, his voice carrying in the silent hall. "All my life, I've been so proud of building myself up from nothing. But somewhere along the way, I forgot what really matters." Maria's hands trembled. She set down the ladle, afraid she might drop it. "I let money poison my relationships with my other children," Ethan continued, his voice breaking. "I pushed everyone away because I was so afraid of being used. And then God sent me a miracle. He sent me you and Daniel, showing me what real love looks like. And what did I do?" Tears rolled down his cheeks now, dropping onto his expensive suit. "I stood there, like a coward while my children insulted you. I let my pride and fear silence me when I should have defended you. I failed as a father, not just to Daniel, but to all my children. And I failed you, Maria." From his corner, Daniel watched with wide eyes, his pencil forgotten in his hand. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Ethan said, looking up at her with raw honesty in his eyes. "But I'm asking for it anyway. Here, in front of everyone, I want to say what I should have said that day. Daniel is my son. I'm proud he's my son. And you, Maria, your dignity, your faith, your love, they're worth more than all my wealth." He held out the toy soldier with shaking hands. "Daniel left this behind. I hoped, maybe it could be a bridge to rebuilding what I broke. If you'll give me that chance." The silence in the hall was absolute. Maria felt tears streaming down her face. But these weren't the bitter tears she'd cried these past few days. These were different. They felt like rain after a long drought, washing away shame and fear and uncertainty. She looked around the room, at the faces of people who'd taken her in without question, who'd supported her when she felt most alone. They'd shown her what true Christian charity meant. Now, watching Ethan humble himself before God and everyone, she felt something else. Hope. Slowly, she nodded, unable to speak through her tears. The scuffing of small shoes broke the silence. Daniel ran forward, crossing the space between them in quick steps. Without hesitation, he threw his arms around Ethan's neck. "I knew you'd come," Daniel whispered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I prayed you would." Ethan's arms wrapped around his son, holding him close as if he'd never let go again. The toy soldier dropped forgotten to the floor as father and son embraced for the first time without any barriers between them. Maria stepped out from behind the serving table, her vision blurry with tears. As she approached them, she saw in Ethan's eyes not the suspicious, guarded look she'd grown used to, but something new. Love, pure and unafraid. Several people in the hall were crying now, watching this moment of grace unfold before them. The evening sun through the stained glass seemed to shine a little brighter, casting them all in its warm, forgiving light. The morning sun cast long shadows across the mansion's driveway as Ethan's car pulled up to the grand entrance. Maria sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while Daniel pressed his face against the window in the back, taking in the familiar sight of the place he'd grown to love. "Welcome home," Ethan said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that had been absent during their first arrival months ago. Before they could even step out of the car, the front door burst open. Olivia marched out, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement, with Grant following close behind. "So this is how it's going to be." Olivia's voice cut through the peaceful morning air. "You're really going to let them move in?" Ethan stepped out of the car, standing tall. His eyes, once cold with suspicion, now blazed with conviction. "Yes, that's exactly how it's going to be. Maria and Daniel are family." "Family?" Olivia scoffed. "They're after your money. Can't you see that?" Maria helped Daniel out of the car, holding him close as the confrontation unfolded. The boy watched with worried eyes, clutching his mother's hand. "No, Olivia." Ethan's voice was firm but calm. "The only ones obsessed with money are standing right here." He looked between his two adult children. "I've spent years watching wealth poison this family. I won't let it happen anymore. Love and truth matter more than inheritance." Grant shifted uncomfortably, his eyes moving from his father to Maria and Daniel. Something in his expression softened as he watched the boy try to be brave in the face of such hostility. "This is ridiculous." Olivia spun on her heel. "Don't expect me to play happy family with them." She stormed off to her car, the engine roaring to life as she sped away. Grant remained, his usual calculating expression replaced by uncertainty. "Dad," he started, then paused. I need time to think about this." "Take all the time you need, son," Ethan replied gently. "But know that my door is always open for all my children." Inside, Maria and Ethan led Daniel up the grand staircase to what would be his new room. The boy's eyes widened as he stepped inside. Gone was the formal guest room decor, replaced by model airplanes hanging from the ceiling, a desk with art supplies, and walls painted a cheerful blue, all arranged with Ethan's careful attention. "Do you like it?" Ethan asked, watching Daniel's face anxiously. "It's amazing." Daniel ran to the window seat, already imagining hours spent reading there with Samson at his feet. That evening, after a quiet dinner filled with small smiles and new beginnings, Ethan stood in Daniel's doorway. The boy lay in his new bed, surrounded by soft blankets and the gentle glow of a nightlight. "I have something to tell you," Ethan said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I've made many mistakes in my life, but leaving you and your mother was the biggest one. I promise you, Daniel, I will never abandon you again." Daniel reached up and wrapped his arms around Ethan's neck. "I know, Daddy," he whispered. "I believe you." Snowflakes danced outside the mansion's frost, kissed windows as Christmas music filled the once silent halls. The grand living room, bathed in the warm glow of the fireplace, had transformed from a showcase of wealth into the heart of a home. Maria stood on her tiptoes, helping Daniel hang shiny ornaments on the towering evergreen tree while Samson's tail thumped happily against the carpet. "Look, Daddy." Daniel called out, holding up a glittering angel ornament. "Where should this one go?" Ethan's heart swelled at the word Daddy. It still felt like a miracle every time he heard it. "How about right there?" He pointed to a bare spot near the middle of the tree, perfectly at Daniel's height. Maria hummed Silent Night softly as she worked, her gentle voice carrying the same warmth that had first caught Ethan's attention in the library. Samson moved between them all, nosing at fallen tinsel and wagging hopefully at the boxes of decorations. "Time for the finishing touch," Ethan announced, pulling out a crystal star that had sat in storage for years. He remembered how his late wife had loved this star, how it had stayed packed away after her passing because the pain was too fresh. Now, watching Maria steady Daniel, as the boy reached for a branch, Ethan felt only gratitude. Standing on a step stool, Ethan carefully placed the star at the very top. It caught the light and scattered tiny rainbows across the ceiling, making Daniel gasp with delight. "Hot cocoa time," Maria announced, disappearing into the kitchen. She returned with a tray of steaming mugs, each topped with tiny marshmallows that made Daniel's eyes shine. They settled onto the plush sofa, Samson curling up at their feet. Daniel started singing Jingle Bells between sips, his small voice full of joy. Maria joined in. Then Ethan surprised them both by adding his deep bass to the impromptu carol. As the evening grew later, Daniel's energy began to fade. He curled up on the rug near Samson, his head resting against the dog's warm side. The firelight played across his peaceful face, so much like Maria's in repose. Ethan looked around the room, at the tree that sparkled with love rather than mere decoration, at his son sleeping contentedly beside the faithful dog, at Maria's gentle presence beside him. His heart felt full to bursting. Taking Maria's hand in his, Ethan bowed his head. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "for giving me back not just a family, but faith itself, for showing me that love matters more than pride, and that it's never too late for redemption." Maria squeezed his hand softly as the snow continued to fall outside, coating the world in peaceful white. In the gentle crackle of the fire and Daniel's soft breathing, Ethan found the answer to years of lonely prayers, love, hope, and the warm glow of belonging. Thanks for spending a moment here with me. If this story touched you, let's keep this connection going. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.